brand credibility it shows up when a brand is really consistent, and that consistency for me does lead to trusting in that brand. Obviously talking about that from a charity space, and trust is such a huge part of brand building for a charity. And me as fundraising, people need to trust that when they donate, the money is going to where they expect it to go. So there's the whole piece there, but also the trust that CALM are able to help the people that we exist to help. I think being really consistent in what we say and what we do is the kind of thing that does build brand credibility.
And the masters of credibility.
Without further ado, welcome Emily Clayton to Credible Conversations. And like I mentioned to you before, I think you're the third person, so still very exciting and new. For those that don't know Emily is Fundraising Director at the amazing charity CALM. Now that stands for Campaign Against Living Miserably. And I don't know, in my head, you guys are synonymous with popularizing is probably a bad word, but raising the entire awareness of the state of men's mental health in general. Before that, there was a lot of conversation about mental health, but no one was making the distinction that it was particularly bad for guys. And obviously, I've been aware of that charity for a while. We've been fortunate enough to do some work with you guys, which we'll probably come on to in as much detail as we can, given the shush secrecy of the whole thing in a bit. But yeah, I think, we're here today to talk about credibility in the world of advertising and marketing. My favorite subject. Nonsense is whole raison d'etre as an agency. So, obviously it's a bit of promo for us, but I think we have a lot to learn from brands like CALM who've, come really out of nowhere to quite spectacular success in terms of brand awareness, while at the same time delivering amazing services for people who are really suffering from a mental health point of view. So, I guess first off, can you just give us a little bit of background on yourself and your role at CALM?
So, as you say, I'm Fundraising Director at CALM, and I've been there coming up to 2 years now, starting in a parental leave cover role and then managing to not leave, which is always good. And previous to CALM, I've been working in the charity sector for nearly 15 years in various marketing and fundraising roles at various charities. And I also had a stint agency side as well. So yeah, that's what I've been doing. And so I guess the first thing to pick out from your intro is we are a suicide prevention charity. So CALM did start very much as a male-focused charity. And as you say, focusing on the fact that men have the highest rates of suicide. And if you're a man over 45, it's the most likely thing to kill you. However, we changed in the last few years to focus on everyone, not just men. So although we do have a very male supporter base and service users, we do exist to help everyone in suicidal crisis. So obviously being a suicide prevention charity, things can be pretty tough. Suicide is a difficult subject, but we exist to break that down and to get people talking and ultimately to help people end their misery and not their lives. So I guess the first part on that kind of brand credibility part is exactly why I've just said to you that we are suicide prevention. We absolutely need to be saying it, and we need to get that word out there and stop people being afraid to use it and all of the stigma attached to it. So we do big campaigns that stop people in their tracks. And as you say, we've managed to really punch above our weight, I guess, in terms of our campaigns and getting our brand awareness out there. We are a relatively small charity, especially for me and the places that I've worked before, I find us quite small. But with that, it means we're really agile. We're a really close team. We work hard. We look out for each other. We look out for our supporters and all of our service users. And any kind of day in the office can be very random, as I know you have experienced coming in. You might find Chesney Hawkes sat there having a coffee.
That was one of the career highlights, to be at a client site. Just Chesney, just like
me trying to angle my laptop to take photos.
yeah, nearly got him. Yeah, okay. So to move on to talk about brand credibility, I think you've set a really interesting scene, right? Obviously, we would probably both say all brands should act really credibly all the time. But let's say your need is probably a bit more pressing than your average brand. You're dealing with suicide prevention, incredibly sensitive subject, and the level of trust required between your brand and service users and people who give to the brand and help facilitate what you're doing is like in every part of the charity sector, that bit higher. Like what you do with my money really matters to me in my relationship with your brand compared to what Mackie D's are doing with, the Happy Meal money that my kids, drag out of my wallet on a monthly basis. So let's talk a little bit about that and what brand credibility really means to you. Because I guess to elaborate on the question a little bit, you did mention your amazing awareness work. Like I think everybody watching this probably remembers the mannequins on top of the buildings on South Bank. But even that comes with a certain responsibility because you've created the awareness. But then what? So what does that mean to you?
I think for me, brand credibility is it shows up when a brand is really consistent, and that consistency for me does lead to trusting in that brand. And I'm, obviously talking about that from a charity space, and trust is such a huge part of brand building for a charity. People, and me as fundraising, people need to trust that when they donate, the money is going to where they expect it to go. So there's the whole piece there, but also the trust that CALM are able to help the people that we exist to help and all that kind of thing. So I think being really consistent in what we say and what we do, and again, just the point on making sure that we do say suicide, that we don't back away from that, is the kind of thing that does build brand credibility. And I think it's about a brand doing consistently what it says it's going to do, or what it exists to do. And that can be from its values. It can be from, like for us, even from our name, Campaign Against Living Miserably. We try, especially in fundraising, to put that against living miserably part in everything that we do. We don't want our supporters to feel burdened by fundraising. We don't it's a really tricky kind of line for us with our cause. Suicide and debt and money problems are really, really closely associated. So how far we want to push our kind of fundraising messaging and our donation, we have to make sure that we keep our brand credible when we add that kind of against living miserably lens to the fundraising that we do, as an example.
Really interesting. And I guess on a really basic basis, yeah, as in my language, that's making sure you're keeping the promise you're putting out there. Everyone sees the mannequins. That's a huge statement about the scale of problem that we're facing. You've immediately begged a big question. What are you doing about it then? And to a certain extent, raising awareness is some of the battle. Like you do lobby, and you do need government and everybody else to understand, and donors to understand that it's worth putting money into this problem because it's fixable. But that's the interesting bit. It's like, how is it fixable? I think, not to critique CALM too much, but when we first started working together, you start finding out very quickly how many calls you answer and the size and scale of that particular operation. And it does immediately validate what you're doing from a brand point of view. I guess compared to when we worked together at Cancer Research UK, you have a relatively simple answer to the problem. Like Cancer Research UK are we're doing 5,000 pieces of research all over the world and blah, blah, blah. Yours is brilliant call center with amazing volunteers that do this. I mean, I know you do more than that as well, but it's a very tangible answer to the question. And you just got to make sure that comes across in your comms as well, right? That you're going, look at these guys, look at the work they're doing.
Yes, but first of all, not volunteers. It's paid staff on our helpline, so straight away, that's one of the reasons that we need to raise money. But those campaigns, when we put the 84 statues on the South Bank, we're not, I guess the difference with our brand is we're not trying to get people to phone the helpline. We want people who are phoning the helpline to be at that point that they really need the professional help that we can provide. And absolutely, that's what it's there for. But those campaigns are also to help people before they get to that point of crisis, to open up the conversation for someone to think, actually, I haven't really heard from my friend recently. I should have the confidence to reach out and ask if they're okay, and actually ask, have you thought about suicide? That is what we're trying to do. We're trying to break all of that down. So along that continuum of need, the helpline is absolutely there for people in crisis, but all of our campaigns are to stop people getting to that point of crisis ultimately.
And I guess that's the bit I miss in my summary, is where quite a lot of it is normalizing conversation around mental health, which your brand awareness work does, as well as raise awareness of the existence of CALM. So like sort of, yeah, almost beyond lobbying, where it's just national psyche. Let's just make sure we know about this stuff and aren't afraid to talk about it.
And I think for us, that's where our brand credibility really comes in, especially with our tone of voice and our kind of boldness and our irreverence. We make sure that we're in the places that people are. So, you go onto our website, you can order beer mats that say feeling shit, and gives you pointers for what you can do and where you can go and talk. Like, we really try and make sure that we're kind of inserted into culture. It shouldn't feel an add-on having these conversations. We're there to just give those little tweaks to make people ask that first question.
And in fact, you set me up beautifully to talk about two of the pillars of what makes a credible brand that Nonsense always bang on about, or me more specifically, I suppose. You mentioned your brashness, and I think that there's a really interesting thing that the really credible brands aren't afraid to have a real personality. Lots of brands will be like, we're inspiring and human, and human's too generic, and so is inspiring, frankly. I mean, most brands are not trying to be boring
inspiring, yeah.
I think that's really interesting because some of that brashness it isn't for everyone. Like, obviously, while you're in the process of normalizing chat about suicide, right? If I think of my dad, that's a harder thing to do for a nearly 70-year-old dude than it is, like he's not going to be like as comfortable. I mean, actually, relatively speaking, he probably is for his age, but the older generations in general. So you have to accept that part of being a credible brand is being a brand that isn't for absolutely everybody. And we've spoken about that before, and I think you guys do it particularly well. So when I met Simon, you kind of get that quite a lot of the brand tone of voice and personality comes directly from Simon, right? And I think that's a really good thing, because that actually is human now, not just generic brand definition of human, because I think brands just mean non-corporate when they say that, and they don't really mean like an actual human with a personality. So that's interesting. So that's one of the two things you mentioned. And then the other thing you mentioned was inserting yourselves into culture. And you obviously you do that with language and tone of voice, but in many other ways as well, in terms of where you show up. I mean, I imagine beer mats are not an accidental choice, right? Like, relationship with alcohol versus depression and suicide are intrinsically linked. And I think the way that you do that is really, really smart, and credible brands do that brilliantly. Let's talk about these pillars then. So you're aware of them because I've presented them to you before, bored you at length with all 6 of them. So at Nonsense, we talk about 6 things really: meaningful promises, authentic storytelling, magnetic personality, which we just touched on, making a cultural contribution, which we just touched on, satisfying experiences, which we'll talk about in a little bit, in terms of delivering on the promise through customer experience, and then a team that believes, in terms of internally, whether or not the wider group than just the marketing team is fully bought into all the promises that we're making as a brand. Now, when we had our little pre-chat to prep for this, I think the two really interesting places, although we already have touched on personality and cultural contribution, the ones that we wanted to dive into today were meaningful promises and satisfying experiences. So let's talk about those in order. When Nonsense talk about meaningful promises, nobody disagrees, right? Nobody goes, oh, brands shouldn't do meaningful promises. They should just, do shit ones. No one says that. But I think like with all of these pillars, it's about like how sharp can you get on the definition and how well do you live by that definition once it's there. So for us, the definition is, making sure that brands make a promise that they can already claim very wholeheartedly that they're delivering upon right now, but that also offers a challenge back to that business in order to deliver on it better every day. So I'd like to talk about your meaningful promise at CALM and how you use it to shape the stuff that you do.
So I've kind of touched on this a little bit already, but I guess first came to mind for our kind of meaningful promise is our mission, which is to help people end their misery and not their lives. And that's kind of in our name with our Against Living Miserably part. It's something that we come back to in everything that we do. Whenever we're putting something out in the world, even when we are putting out campaigns that are really hard hitting, that our last photo campaign, for example, it's that there's still elements in that, obviously in all of the planning and everything we do, that comes back to we need to help people end their misery and not their lives. And although that video is showing the kind of the unexpectedness of it and the fact that you think that these people don't seem suicidal, it's still, that journey that you have to go on after you watch those videos, after you are taken back by it, is to think, wow, I didn't realize that. So now I need to think about how I can, help myself, help other people, etc., and come back to there's another way. I guess another one of our big campaigns that we do is that we kind of come back to quite often is our stay campaign. So simple, just the word stay. But we have had people write into us to say they saw our billboard saying stay and it changed their life. It is amazing to have that kind of thing. So all of that comes back to our promise.
You've got an amazing promise in terms of, I think, a couple of things. The idea of, helping people end their misery and not their lives is bang on what we would define in terms of being a really meaningful promise. In short, because you do lots of very direct things. You mentioned the billboard advertising, you mentioned the call center with your amazing team of trained professionals. You can evidence that right now, but also this mission never ends. There's tons and tons of ways to stop people living miserably and stop people committing suicide. And so, it encapsulates the scale of the challenge for you really well and allows you to keep iterating and thinking of finding new ways in order to do that. I also love that it's just baked into the name and the language of what you're about. Even though you wanted to raise, probably the initial thing is like, let's raise the ceiling on conversations around mental health and depression and suicide, right? The words mental health, depression and suicide aren't in the name.
No.
And I think that's really important because back, especially when you started, those were almost problem words where as soon as you start mentioning them, I switch off. But if you start talking to me about not wanting to live miserably, I can't really hide. I can't say you're making me uncomfortable and I don't want to have that conversation. So it's really smart the way that it's been constructed and the way you guys use that language around that, I think is really, really good. In terms of how the promise spurs you guys on to do more, do you have examples of, in the time that you've been there, like what sort of things have CALM been doing to deliver even further on the promise?
There's two sides that I want to talk about. There's the classic, and maybe sounds a bit cliche, but doing more by doing less. But that doing less is, as you've just kind of referred to, terms like mental health and depression are that definitely talked about a lot more than they used to be. And I think there's loads of brilliant work and loads of brilliant charities and causes that are working in that space. It's so broad. We are suicide prevention. So we really do bring ourselves back to making sure that the work that we do is in that really pointy end of the spectrum. It is all about suicide prevention. We have previously worked with, certainly with partners who are way more comfortable saying we're a mental health charity than we're a suicide prevention charity. And actually, as we're homing in on that even more, our doing more is saying, no, we're suicide prevention. And if you don't want to talk about suicide prevention, then we're probably not going to align, with that work's not going to go really well. So there's kind of the doing less there by making sure that we're really focused on suicide prevention and not the massive broader spectrum of mental health. They're obviously very much interlinked. And then I guess the other side that I wanted to touch on is from a fundraising point of view. Obviously, I think the fun and the joy that I get working at CALM in fundraising is how much we can bring our promise into the fundraising that people do. And one of the things that I hope to be known for at CALM is kind of when we're, setting our strategies and our objectives, one of the things that I always come back to is that I want anyone who has supported CALM, whether they've run a marathon for us or whether they've, sponsored someone a $5 who is running the marathon or just come and done a donation, whatever their interaction is with CALM, I want them to be like, whether it's the confirmation email that we send or the thank you message, being able to use our brand and our brilliant tone of voice and all of the bits that make it up and align with that credible promise of against living miserably. There's actually just so much kind of fun and tongue-in-cheek stuff that we can do in fundraising with that. And that's something that, I've not been able to use a brand in that way anywhere else that I've worked because just for many different reasons, but there's a real kind of, fun in what we can do there, which is why we get some like the fundraising that people do for us. My favorite one, I'm not going to remember the names properly now, but somebody cycled from, it was something like Shitterton to Twat. which was basically cycling the length of the country. But, and that's the kind of thing we'll push that out on our socials. We will talk about that.
And that's been copied a bunch of times. There's some guy did it across America for a different charity afterwards. Just, so I think the whole thing of finding stupid place names and has become a thing. And it's amazing you can do that. I hadn't thought about it before, but the against living miserably bit does imply like you've got to be fun in tone, right?
Yeah.
All the time. And so the way that you're flexing that is a good example of where you're using the promise to drive the business forward and do things differently all the time and push for better. I
think I've told you before about our cheer points on race days at marathons and big events like that, which, all charities do brilliant things on race days, but for us and our relatively small team, we make every single one of our runners feel like an absolute rock star when they go past us. Like, it's the screaming, the shouting, the confetti cannons, the everything that we do. It's again, like, people aren't going to run for us and not go, that was, even though I ran a marathon, that was great.
That was great. And I want to do it again. And I guess spurs them on to collect the money off of their mates more.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. All right. Well, I think, we've done a really good chat, I think, about meaningful promises. You guys do live the promise out through a lot of what you do. And I think, how that plays out in fundraising is really nice to hear. Because I think some of the things, like charities are a bit unique, right? Because the customer and the service user, although there's overlap, right? I'm sure you have lots of people who you've helped who do give money. They are largely separate audiences, and I think it's really nice to see how that plays out, not just in service delivery, but in my brand experience as someone who's a regular giver. We should say at some point during this podcast that people should go to thecalmzone.net and give some money to CALM, or sign up to give regularly. But obviously incredible cause, give what you can, etc. Moving on to talk about another aspect of what makes a credible brand, and to talk about satisfying experiences for a little bit. It's kind of the obvious thing. Whenever I start talking about brands making meaningful promises, the obvious next thing to talk about, so the sort of pillar 2 on our list in the order in which we talked about them is, well, make sure you deliver an experience that satisfies the promise that you've made. And some of what you were talking about, the fundraising experience, I think, especially that example of cheer squads on the marathon route really does play into that. For us, I think with the brands we work with, satisfying the promise is almost the minimum. You want to make people really believe in the promise and be proud of the choice that they made, especially in the charity world. But even, we work with like AXA, massive insurance company. You've got like, as a high consideration purchase, I chose AXA for my health insurance, say. When I interact with that or make a claim, I want to feel like I made the right choice. Or at least AXA want the customer to make them feel like they made the right choice, because they want them to stay. And that's part of, building trust and therefore loyalty. What do you guys feel, you're doing to help your customers? And I guess we can divide it into the service user fundraiser group, to give them experiences that really build that trust and belief.
So I guess looking at supporters first, one of the things that I really enjoy is when you see a new product, or mainly a product actually out there, and you can really see, I know what problem they have addressed. I know what, they have thought about this audience, and they have understood a pain point of that audience, and they have created this. And I really enjoy when I see examples of that. And so I think I've always been really interested in the kind of user insight and customer experience side of all of the kind of charity work that I've done. So we do a lot already, but there's definitely room for more, for us to be actually going out there and speaking to our supporters and testing things with them, and really understanding what we're not doing already, what those gaps are, and how we can fill them, and the work that that we obviously did together end of last year. That was a brilliant piece of work for us to be able to, for me especially, to be able to show to the organisation, like, these are the people we've spoken to, and this is the great testing that we've done, and these are the problems that we need to solve, and be able to come up with that. So I think that's something that we are doing more of. I think there's room for more, and actually some of kind of fundraising initiatives we've been doing recently have meant that we've got a much bigger database of people that we can go out to and quickly ask these things. So doing more of that is definitely part of it for me.
So like just in getting voice of customer into the room, right, at the client side, so that it's shaping the things that you're doing is super important. Actually, we didn't mention this, but charities are probably better than most commercial businesses in terms of transparency around financials, which I think goes a massive way to building brand credibility. We know customers, not all of them, but a small percentage of customers will look at that. It's why BP and Shell get slammed for greenwashing every single time they make any claim, because there's a good few people that will check how much money they're spending on digging up Siberia or whatever they're doing. And so, but I think the charity sector has always been a bit better. There's normally trustees involved. There's normally a sort of mandated amount of transparency required around numbers. But yeah, it's an interesting point about like brands not necessarily taking that opportunity as well as, commercial brands don't exploit that opportunity as well as they perhaps could. Most do an annual report for the stock exchange and only a few investors read it, and it can be done with much better storytelling and be an opportunity to make me love what a brand is doing.
Yeah.
You mentioned like things that you're doing to improve experience for customers. Can you tell us about any of those stuff?
We're doing lots actually, especially in the I suppose the services side of our organisation. So as we've talked about, we have the helpline, which is excellent. But demand for the helpline has never been higher, and costs for everything have also never been higher. So those two things do not meet. And part of what we are doing in our current strategy is developing more digital scalable tools. So again, we can help people before that point of crisis and have the tools and access that people need whenever they want to be able to get to it. So we're doing lots in that space, and lots of testing, lots of collaborating with different organizations, finding out more of what we can be doing. But there's been some really interesting stuff with particularly call waiting, and being able to look at, all industries that have helplines will have call waiting stuff. But what can we do for people who are, by the time that someone has picked up the phone who's in suicidal crisis, the last thing that we want is for them to have a added stress of the waiting experience. So there's been some amazing stuff that we've tested and have got out there in the world in that space to help that experience. It feels weird to say that it's improving customer experience, but it's, they exist to try and, ultimately to help the people who are at that point of crisis.
I guess we shy away from calling service users customers, and it feels a bit awkward, but it is about CX. It's about doing good CX. It's the same exact piece of work.
We've got a thing called Offload Your Thoughts, which if you're waiting on, when you're waiting, it's something that you can be signposted to, and it's like an online journaling tool. And actually, we've had such amazing feedback on that, and just helping people get their thoughts together in that moment. And it's things like that are really helping both our call waiting, but also that experience before someone.
They probably get more out of. This is probably deliberate, but they get more out of the call by just organising their thoughts a little bit before somebody picks up.
Yeah,
because I imagine with there's sort of a level of panic and stress that's led to me to pick up the phone in that environment in the first place. How good am I going to be at articulating what my issues are? 5 minutes of reflection while I'm waiting, rather than 5 minutes of fretting, it's a much better use of the same time, and the calls probably go better as a result and are more efficient as a result. It's really smart. I was going to mention actually, there's a scary level of AI phone services that are available now. Soon we'll be doing quite a lot of the initial chats on phones with
triaging and stuff like that. Yeah,
and you can't even tell who you're talking to. Really reticent to think about it in terms of a counselling sort of conversation. Right? It will happen. Like arguably an AI that has the sort of memory bank of every single phone call that CALM ever fielded and did would be the best possible counsellor, rather than, not to do the counsellors down, but like a really serious, experienced counsellor may have only done a few hundred calls in their entire career, whereas the AI would technically have not done, but like at least have access to how those conversations went for every single conversation.
Although, I mean, currently, and I'm definitely not the expert to talk about this, but there's ethical, obviously there's ethical considerations of all of that, but we don't record calls, and all calls are anonymous anyway. So that bank doesn't exist. So how we would be able to do that, I'm not sure. And I definitely think there's a place for AI in, like I said, that kind of triaging point, and making sure that the call handler has a bit more information about the call they're about to take and are ready for that subject matter. But I don't know, for me, and maybe I will regret saying this on a recorded podcast, but for me, there will always be the human need in this kind of service.
Certainly, it's really hard to imagine
Until
it any other way.
All robots.
Yeah. Well, I do think, like that data protection thing about like how do you train like large language models while respecting people's data. I mean, there's loads of cases in the court with, whether or not the AIs should have been allowed to consume every piece of design or artwork ever created, and music in particular is a battleground of this. So we've talked about satisfying experiences just then, and before that we had a good little chat about the actual meaningful promise in the first place, and that's what we said we were going to do. So we're nearly done, but I do want to come back to one thing, which is this idea of magnetic personality. I wish we'd talked about it in our little prep call.
We do.
But when you think about it, right, like it is such a strong aspect of the CALM brand, right, is the personality. I want to summarize that a little bit, because I feel like it's easily overlooked. Brands tend to come at personality from like, who can we make sure we don't offend? And most brands are probably thinking more mass than they need to in order to achieve their business goals as well, because we like the idea of being of mass appeal. But you're showing that leaning into what is a little bit of a divisive personality does pay dividends. It's the thing that works. Even just having the chutzpah to do a billboard that just says stay. Like there's many brands that wouldn't do it. Yeah, I mean, like, what can you tell us about? Like, you're clearly deliberately leaning into it. So, is that a directive, or is it just based on trying what works, and the more you lean into it, the more it works?
Honestly, I think it's probably a bit of both now. The brand is so well defined for us that I think everyone internally at CALM and the different agencies and things that we work with, like I think because we haven't tried to be too broad, we kind of know it, we believe it, we live and breathe it. So it kind of, a lot of it just comes naturally now, and it's really easy for us to make decisions on whether something feels like it's calm or not, and also whether it's something that we could make more calm. And those kind of conversations happen all of the time, and we definitely say no to things that don't feel calm. So I guess it's not just the stuff that we put out; it's the stuff that we work with, and the partners or the ideas that come along. We do it from both ways. So I guess, to your point, it is the fact that I guess it comes back to the doing more by doing less thing as well. Like we don't try and be all things to all people, which I think is absolutely crucial in being a credible brand.
It's amazing to have such a clear definition and be like, it does or doesn't feel calm. For those listening, Nonsense has been directly on the receiving end of that. Can't say too much about the project, but Nonsense go, here's a few proposed new customer experiences to answer a particular business problem of CALM's. And the major conversation was about which of those feel calm.
Yeah.
And there was kind of two reasons for doing that, right? One is, that when you lean into your personality, it works. So the one that feels the most us. And then, two is obviously just the consistency thing with everything else you're doing. It would be weird if it didn't, kind of thing. But I don't know, in my career, I think I've rarely seen that lens used that early in the process. It feels almost like and now we'll make it on brand, right?
Yeah.
All the other decisions now we'll make it on brand. So for it to be really high up in your decision making about which direction you went in on that particular CX project, I think speaks volumes, and just reiterates my belief that brand personality is way more important than most brands tend to give it credit for.
Yeah, and it's not just the assets and the all of that that goes with it. It's
somebody else is writing the copy over there, and I trust them that they've read the brand guidelines, and that's enough. It's actually what do you do as much as what do you say, and that I think that's the really where the power really comes in with personality. No, we would do the much more disruptive one of these because we're calm.
Yeah, totally.
And if we didn't, it wouldn't be very us. And there's no differentiation there.
It's been really interesting in fundraising because we, like most charities, need to raise more money, and we're doing things that are new to CALM that are not new to charity fundraising, but Facebook challenges, for example, which have obviously been around for a really long time, and we're testing them at the moment. But our approach wasn't can we make Facebook challenges work? We know they work. It was, can we make Facebook challenges right for CALM? Like, rather than doing them in the way that everyone else does, and rather than following the kind of even from a creative point of view, our main thing was to make sure it didn't look like all of the other Facebook challenges. And again, that's worked really well for us.
All industries do this, where everybody looks at each other. So, what's charity X doing? What's charity Y doing? And before you know it, like within an industry vertical, everyone's doing pretty much the same stuff. I was in a presentation once where somebody showed print ads for beer. Right. And it was just a succession of like bottles pouring ice cold looking liquid into a frosty glass to sort of deliver design refreshment cues. And, you just like, these could be all the same beer. Like, it doesn't really matter what the word is written on the bottle at this point. And that distinctiveness just goes out the window completely when you do that. So I think, you guys, rather than looking at competitors, looking at other industries, looking at comparators, and taking your inspiration from, because if you list brands that are like CALM, I don't think I'd list any charities. I might list Virgin Atlantic, or you're going to get like real like personality forward brands. I think that's a much better place to be in terms of letting it guide a lot of what you're doing. And I think going back to the sort of satisfying experiences thing as well, our opinion as an agency is that too much of that is just about best practice. Like when CX practitioners go, the way it's done is we take away all the pain points, and we use the slickest tech, and we do. And of course, you have to do a bunch of that stuff. It's a bit like hygiene factors on. If you're going to run a social media campaign, don't do the obvious things that will make the algorithm just punish you. But you've still, all you're doing there is not failing, not finding a brilliant way to win. And I think that's if you can put the idea of brand really front and center in CX, then you can find step change ways of winning. And it's probably not, see what that charity's done, we're going to do our better version of that. It's like, that's the way that charity chose to solve that problem. We start again. The way CALM would solve this problem is, do you know what? We wouldn't even do a website. It would be a chatbot thing, or whatever it would be, So thank you for the additional time. Yeah, it's been brilliant. I think CALM are an amazing example, in particular on that whole that last thing we talk about in terms of magnetic personality and the brand promise that fuels that. Strangely, the way you guys approach satisfying experiences is almost a product of your personality anyway. I think is a really interesting way of looking at it. Something that I'll be talking to, using as an example in presentations with other clients, actually, because I think it's a very interesting way to look at it, because it makes you do things very differently, which is not always a secret to success, but at least it might, you can take some moonshots, which often get ruled out when you're doing things from a ground up, build the thing, don't make the same mistakes as everybody else, or slightly improve on what the competition are doing kind of approach. So yeah, really, really interesting. So I guess that all that remains is to say thank you very much, Emily Clayton.
Thank you. Thanks, Will.
Excellent podcast appearance and performance. And go to thecalmzone.net and give some money.
Yes, please.
To CALM, because they always, you still need money, right?
yeah, it'll be helpful. Thank you.
Still got a huge backlog of calls to answer and all of that beautiful stuff that you guys do. So yeah, anybody who gets the chance to donate. When we post it on social, we'll make sure we post a link to that, and I'll get you a version of this, and you can do the same, and blah, blah, blah.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you soon, mate.
Okay. Thanks. Bye. Bye.
And the masters of credibility.